Yeah, I think our memory is like that. It's like everything's connected.
I refuse you to insult Michael. He's a friend of mine. I love him, and I don't like people making fun.
At 81, Diana Ross has finally broken her long-held silence about one of the most complex and cherished relationships in her life, the one she shared with Michael Jackson. For decades, the two icons stood at the pinnacle of fame, their bond often described as more than just friendship. It was mentorship, it was family, and perhaps in many ways it was love. Not romantic, but deeply emotional. But as the years passed and controversies engulfed Michael Jackson's legacy, Ross remained unusually quiet. She didn't offer detailed interviews. She didn't take part in documentaries. She didn't write tell-all memoirs. Her silence left fans wondering, what did Diana Ross really think of the King of Pop? What did she know? And why didn't she ever speak until now? In a recent and rare reflection, Diana Ross opened up about Michael in a way she never had before. Not with scandal, not with bitterness, but with a quiet kind of heartbreak that only someone who truly loved him could express. She spoke of a boy who used to sit backstage watching her perform, soaking in every note and every gesture. A boy who called her Mama, and who once told her she was his greatest teacher. She didn't speak to defend or condemn, but to remember. And what she remembered was both beautiful and painful, because while the world often focuses on Jackson's fame, Diana Ross saw his fear. While we remember the music, she remembers the loneliness. And while many have chosen sides in the battle over Jackson's legacy, Ross chose compassion. What Diana Ross has now revealed about Michael Jackson is not just a confession, it's a final act of love. A truth she carried silently for decades, waiting for the right moment to speak it aloud. And when she did, the world was forced to look at Michael Jackson not as a myth, not as a scandal, but as a human being seen through the eyes of someone who truly knew him. What did Diana Ross finally say after all these years? The answer will leave you speechless. The story of Diana Ross and Michael Jackson didn't begin on stage or in front of millions. It started in quiet admiration, in the shy awe of a young boy mesmerized by the powerful presence of a star. In the late 1960s, when the Jackson 5 were just beginning to rise, Berry Gordy, the visionary behind Motown, knew they needed more than talent to make it big. They needed visibility, mentorship, and someone who could command both the stage and the camera. That person was Diana Ross. Already an icon with the Supremes, Ross became the gateway through which the world would discover the magical energy of Michael Jackson. And for Michael, Diana wasn't just a mentor, she was a beacon, someone who represented everything he aspired to become. Diana took the Jackson brothers under her wing, introducing them to Hollywood's elite, hosting them in her home, and most crucially, placing Michael under her watchful care. For the young boy from Gary, Indiana, this wasn't just an opportunity, it was a life-changing connection. He admired her poise, her precision, her dedication to performance. He would often sit for hours observing how she prepared for shows, how she carried herself on set, and how she handled fame with grace. Diana, in return, recognized something extraordinary in Michael. She often said he wasn't like the other children. His intensity, his emotional depth, and his almost obsessive attention to detail made him special. And she nurtured that spark. Their bond deepened quickly. Michael would often call her mother in interviews, and even in private, he confided in her like a son would. She offered him more than industry guidance. She offered him emotional safety, stability, and affection, all things he struggled to find even within his own family. In her home, he found refuge from the chaos of stardom and the harsh demands placed on him by his father. Diana, for her part, never saw Michael as merely a protégé. She saw him as someone fragile, someone who carried a deep emotional burden even at a young age. Their connection wasn't transactional, it was spiritual. And that emotional closeness would continue for decades, evolving, strengthening, and surviving every storm. As Michael grew into superstardom, Diana remained his constant. He often sent her handwritten letters filled with admiration and childlike affection. In one of them, he famously wrote, "I love you. You are my forever." And he meant it. His attachment to her was so deep that when he drafted his will in the early 2000s, he named her as the guardian of his children if his mother Catherine couldn't fulfill that role. That decision stunned many, but not those who knew how much she meant to him. It wasn't just a legal detail. It was a final gesture of trust from someone who had always seen Diana Ross as his emotional anchor. But even with all the love between them, their relationship wasn't without its silences. When Michael began to change, physically, emotionally, and artistically, Diana chose not to speak publicly. She didn't join the chorus of critics, nor did she defend every controversial choice he made. Instead, she remained distant, perhaps protecting both him and herself from the spectacle of public opinion. And when allegations began to haunt his legacy, Diana remained silent still. Many wondered why someone so close to Michael didn't speak up. But now, at 81, Diana Ross has offered a glimpse into the reason behind that silence. It wasn't fear. It wasn't complicity. It was grief. A grief too personal, too sacred to be turned into sound bites. This chapter in Diana Ross's life is more than just a footnote in Michael Jackson's story. It's the origin of one of the deepest, most enduring emotional bonds in music history. And as she begins to speak now, not in headlines but in heartfelt reflection, we begin to understand that the truth she held inside wasn't just about Michael. It was about love, loss, and everything she was never able to say while he was still alive. For years, Diana Ross's silence about Michael Jackson spoke louder than any words could. As the world dissected every aspect of Jackson's life, from his shifting appearance to his reclusive lifestyle and the mounting legal troubles, Ross remained publicly quiet, even when her name was pulled into the conversation. People wondered why. Why wouldn't one of his closest allies and oldest friends step forward to defend him? Why wouldn't she use her voice to confront the accusations, challenge the media frenzy, or share memories that might humanize the increasingly isolated king of pop? But the truth, as she's now gently revealed, was far more complicated than anyone imagined. Her silence wasn't abandonment. It was protection, both for him and for herself. In recent reflections, Ross explained that watching Michael's life unravel from the sidelines was like watching a loved one drift out to sea, powerless to help. There were times, she admitted, when she didn't recognize the man the world saw. Not because he had changed too much, but because the man they portrayed was never the man she knew. The Michael she remembered was soft-spoken, intuitive, endlessly kind. He was fragile, not dangerous, haunted, not monstrous, and above all, he was misunderstood. But Ross also confessed that as his fame grew into something unprecedented and uncontrollable, so too did the forces around him. His world became a circus of enablers, opportunists, and yes-men, and through it all, Michael became harder to reach, even for her. When the first wave of allegations hit in 1993, Diana Ross was devastated. She didn't know how to reconcile the gentle soul she had watched grow from a boy into a man with the terrifying headlines flooding the media. Privately, she wrestled with disbelief, confusion, and sorrow. Publicly, she said nothing, not because she didn't care, but because the truth she knew didn't fit into the courtroom narratives or tabloid stories. She wasn't there to witness everything in Michael's adult life, and so she felt she had no right to speak with certainty. And yet, her heart told her that the boy she had loved and protected couldn't be the villain the world insisted he was. The pain of not knowing, of not being able to help, tore at her. Her silence continued through Michael's second legal battle in the early 2000s. Again, she refused to join the public fray, not as a defender, not as a denier, but as someone who simply couldn't bear to watch the man she called my son be torn apart by the very world he had once mesmerized. Behind the scenes, friends say Ross was deeply affected by it all. She worried about his mental health, his loneliness, his ability to cope. But still, she kept her grief private. Some truths, she said recently, don't belong to the world. They belong to the heart. And that is where she kept them, buried deep, where they wouldn't be manipulated or misquoted. But after Michael's sudden death in 2009, something in Ross shifted. The guilt of silence, the ache of unanswered questions, and the permanence of his absence weighed heavily on her. She spoke briefly at the time, issuing a heartfelt statement, but then retreated once again into privacy. Now at 81, she's finally beginning to unpack the reasons why. I wasn't ready to talk, she said, because I hadn't processed the loss. It wasn't just Michael the star who died. It was Michael the child I loved, the young man I watched, become something the world had never seen before. I lost him long before he passed away. In the years that followed, Ross would occasionally post tributes or share kind words about Michael on stage, but nothing deeply revealing until now. Her recent comments mark a quiet breaking of that silence, not to make headlines or rewrite history, but to remind the world that Michael Jackson wasn't just a superstar or a scandal. He was someone's friend, someone's family, someone who, behind the glitter and spectacle, carried wounds so deep that even those who loved him most couldn't always reach them. And for Diana Ross, that truth is both beautiful and unbearably tragic. As Diana Ross reflected on her decades-long relationship with Michael Jackson, one thing became painfully clear. His legacy was never simple, and neither was her love for him. In many ways, Diana became a witness to the making of a legend and the unraveling of a soul. She saw Michael at his most inspired and his most insecure. She saw the little boy who idolized her become the man the world obsessed over, and eventually, the target of its sharpest criticisms. And through it all, she carried a burden that no one else could understand. The burden of watching someone she helped raise be devoured by the very fame he once chased with such innocence. Ross has said that Michael's perfectionism, his relentless pursuit of excellence, and his inability to settle for anything less than brilliance was something he learned, in part, by watching her. And while she was proud to be his role model, she also couldn't help but wonder if she had unintentionally passed along her own emotional isolation, the need to always be on, to mask pain with performance, to let the applause drown out the cries for help. "We were both taught to perform through pain," she recently admitted. "But no one ever taught us how to rest, how to heal, how to be okay with just being human." In the later years of his life, Ross found it increasingly hard to reach Michael. Fame had swallowed him whole, and the people surrounding him were not the ones who had known him as a child, who had seen the raw, unguarded boy behind the magic. She was no longer his daily guide or confidant. She had become a distant lighthouse, still shining, but too far from shore. The calls became less frequent. The visits became rarer, and Diana, always protective, chose not to chase him into the darkness. Instead, she prayed for him, quietly hoping he would one day find peace, not just from the media, but from himself. Michael's death hit her like a thunderclap. She didn't cry publicly. She didn't grant interviews or sit for televised tributes, but those close to her say she was shattered, not because she didn't see it coming, but because she always hoped there would be time to repair what fame had broken, to have one final, honest conversation. A goodbye that never came. When she learned he had named her as the guardian of his children in his will, she felt honored, but also devastated. It was the clearest sign that even in his final years he still trusted her more than almost anyone. That trust, she now says, is what she treasures most, and what breaks her heart every time she remembers it. And yet, amid the sorrow, Ross refuses to let Michael's memory be defined by the headlines or the courtrooms. She recalls the joy he brought into every room, the childlike curiosity that never left him, and the unshakable belief that music could heal. "He believed in the magic," she said, "and sometimes the world punished him for it." That belief, naive, pure, and at times self-destructive, was the essence of who Michael was. And for Diana, no scandal or controversy can ever erase that. She acknowledges that his story is tangled, that the truth about Michael Jackson lives in 1,000 shades of gray. But her truth? It lives in the boy who used to hold her hand backstage, in the man who called her his second mother, and in the legacy of music and vulnerability he left behind. Regretfully, she knows there were things left unsaid, moments missed, and times she wished she had reached out when he was slipping away. But as she now breaks her silence, it's not with judgment or defense, it's with love, and a kind of aching clarity only time can bring. Because to Diana Ross, Michael Jackson was never just a superstar, he was family. And even now, all these years later, she carries him with her, not as an icon, but as a memory still tender, still raw, and still very much alive in her heart. Now at 81, Diana Ross has finally said the words she held back for far too long. Not for the cameras, not for public redemption, but for herself and for Michael. The truth she reveals is not a bombshell of scandal, nor a secret meant to rewrite the past. It is something far more human, a confession of emotional debt, of deep-rooted guilt, and an overwhelming love that was never fully expressed while he was still alive. "I should have done more," she admitted quietly. "I should have said more. I thought I had time." Those words echo with the weight of someone who has carried decades of silence not as a shield, but as a scar. Diana speaks now not to settle a score or to silence critics, but to reclaim the memory of a friend, a child, a man who was ripped apart by fame and abandoned by many when he needed love most. She refuses to define Michael by the controversy that consumed the final chapters of his life. Instead, she offers her truth, the truth of a boy who wanted only to be seen, to be loved without condition, and to feel safe in a world that was never built to protect someone so sensitive. In her eyes, Michael was not a symbol, he was a soul, a lonely, brilliant, deeply feeling soul who was crushed under the impossible expectations of an audience that demanded perfection, even at the cost of his peace. Her voice, though soft, is steady as she explains why she waited until now. "I couldn't speak while the noise was still loud. The world wasn't ready to listen, and maybe neither was I. But time has a way of sharpening perspective, and what Diana Ross has come to understand in her twilight years is that love left unspoken can be just as haunting as words said too late." The memories still flicker vividly, Michael imitating her stage moves as a child, laughing in the corner of the studio, hugging her tightly before shows, his voice trembling when he told her, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Now she realizes, she never told him that she felt the same. Diana Ross has also come to see that their story, hers and Michael's, is about more than just music. It's about how two people, both molded by Motown, stardom, and performance, found in each other something rare and real in a world built on illusion. But where she learned to cope with the industry's weight through control and composure, Michael struggled, seeking refuge in childhood fantasies and artistic escapes. And though they walked parallel paths, Diana now admits that their emotional languages were sometimes mismatched. She didn't always understand the depths of his suffering, and by the time she did, he was already too far gone. Still, she speaks now with hope, not just to honor him, but to remind the world of the humanity behind the myth. "He wasn't perfect," she says. "None of us are. But he was kind. He was generous. He was more than what they said." That's the final truth she needed to share. Not to erase the darkness that surrounded his name, but to balance it. To remind us that Michael Jackson was once a little boy who believed in magic, who found that magic through her, and who spent his life trying to give it back to the world. In breaking her silence, Diana Ross hasn't just told the world something about Michael Jackson. She's revealed something about herself, that grief doesn't always speak in real time, that love sometimes arrives too late to be heard, and that the hardest truths are often the ones we carry alone. But now she's finally let it go, not in bitterness, not in shame, but in love. A love that spanned decades, crossed unimaginable fame, and endured through the silence. For Diana Ross, that's the truth the world needed to hear. And for Michael Jackson, it's the truth he always deserved.